Today we're having a look at changing the size and shape of your cells in your Stitch Mastery chart, and there are two different reasons why you might want to do this. You may wish to change the shape of your cells into rectangles to replicate the actual size and dimension of a knitted stitch, so to create what's known as knitter's graph. And the other reason that you might want to change the size of your cells is slightly less obvious, but we're sometimes asked whether you can change the weight or thickness of your grid lines, and that's not possible to do. The grid lines are 2 pixels wide and that can't be changed at the moment, but by changing the actual size of your cells you can mimic the effect of making the grid lines thicker or thinner because they take up a different amount of space in relation to a differently sized cell. So by default the cells are 36 pixels wide and tall, and one thing to note before I start demonstrating anything is that if you have more than one chart open in a Knit2 file and you change the dimensions of the cells in that Knit2 file, that will apply to all of the charts in the Knit2 file. So you can't have, for instance, a chart here with cells that are 36 by 36 pixels and then a chart here with different size cells. They will all be converted to be the same cell size. So to demonstrate some differences, I'm going to copy this chart and paste it into a separate Knit2 file. So first of all, we shall imagine that we want to make our grid lines look thicker. So in order to make the 2 pixel line seem thicker compared to the cells, we're going to make the cells smaller. So we come to diagram and edit diagram properties. And you may recognise these grid highlighting and annotating repeated stitches options because they are included in the menu when you first set up a chart. So if you come to find that you have a preference as to exactly what size you want your grid cells to be, you can actually set that up when you start a new chart. But we'll open the grid menu. So we're going to make the cells smaller, so let's half them, so we'll make them 18 pixels wide and high, and you'll spot that we can also change the colour. I'm going to leave that at the moment for this demonstration, so click OK, and you'll notice immediately that my charts have gotten smaller. And firstly I'm just going to fit to height, and the next thing that we clearly need to do is to change the font size for our row and column numbering. So come to edit font, and again we've halved the size of the cells, so I'm going to halve the size of the font, and this is changed in the chart that I had selected, but you'll see it's much more in ratio with the size of the cells. So if we click back over to the original chart, you can really clearly see the difference. These grid lines in the chart look much thicker just by merit of the cells being smaller. And to go the other way, we come to again to diagram, edit diagram properties, and let's double the size. So they were 36, so let's make them 72 pixels. And now let's try changing the grid colour, this dark purple. Click OK, and again you see instantly that the chart has increased in size a lot. So again you're going to want to zoom to fit some way or another, and you'll note the difference in font size. So you remember that in this chart we changed the font to size 8, and the original size font size 16 is on this chart here, but we can always change it up a similar amount, so doubled the cell size, so let's double from the original font size up to size 32, and again it's in a more normal ratio to the cells. And clicking back to the chart again, the original chart, you can see that these grid lines do look quite a lot thicker than in the new chart, and the dark purple is also that bit sharper than the default grey. Now, one thing that you'll obviously want to note is that these charts are getting smaller and bigger, and that will have a knock-on effect when you come to export your charts and place them in your pattern layout. Depending on how you set up your pattern layout, you might be able to resize the charts in that program when you get them into place. But remember that when you export to image, you have control over the pixel size, or you can change it by scale as well. So this larger chart with the larger cells, we've got the width at 2249 pixels. And just to compare, if we come back to the original chart diagram and export to image, the width is 522 pixels wide, so quite a considerable difference in size for the chart. And now to come on to the idea of changing the actual shape of the cells to suit. So we have a specific example. Somebody fairly recently asked about changing the shape of their cells because they wanted to create essentially knitter's graph with the equivalent of 7 stitches to 8 rows. So 8 rows fitting into the same space as 7 stitches. And obviously you could create your cells 7 by 8 pixels, but those would be very small. So you want to scale that up and find the numbers which most suitably fit the size of cells that you want and which still relate to each other in the same proportion as 7 to 8. So the example that we gave in reply was to set the width to 40 pixels. And then you need to be able to divide that by 8, so she wanted 8 rows. So obviously 40 divided by 8 is 5, and then you can times that by the 7 stitches she wanted, so 35 pixels for the height. And that means that your rows are that little bit shorter in height, so that you get 8 rows fitting into the space of 7 stitches wide. So let's just try that and see how it looks. Back into grid, so we're going 40 pixels wide and 35 pixels high. And the chart now is more realistically replicating how the knitted fabric is going to look. And of course you can experiment with different ratios depending on the gauge that your designs are going to be worked to.